Hello everybody, Paul here. Welcome to Race Department, Race Room Racing Experience Test Drive in some GT3 cars. Sorry for the delay, had a few technical issues. We'll be going live as we speak. I'll be going onto the track very shortly. First car at day today is going to be the Callaway Corvette, which I'm sure we're all very excited about trying. Early heads up, I'm a rubbish driver and I've done no practice. So, let us begin. I'm going to be using default setup because I don't know anything about setting a car up. I'll be joined very shortly by Alex Hodgkinson, who is the new physics engineer for Race Room Racing Experience and the gentleman responsible for creating these wonderful cars. For those of you that don't know, the Callaway Corvette C7 R GT3, the Audi R8 LMS and the Mercedes GT3 are the three new models that will be coming in the upcoming patch next couple of weeks, week or so. But the changes to the physics have been made for all the GT3 cars that are part of the current Race Room GTR3 offering. So obviously when we do get the public patch, regardless of whether you purchase these new cars or not, you will be finding quite a substantial change to the way the cars behave, the way the cars handle, and we'll be talking to Alex in more detail about that, what it sort of means for the player behind the wheel and what the guys at Sector 3 have been doing to make these not insubstantial changes to the cars. So while we're waiting for Alex, who's just disconnected, to fix a technical issue, to join us, I'm going to get on track. Not really going to say a great deal, and we'll bask in the glory of a Callaway Corvette engine noise. We're at Silverstone. I'm about to make a fool of myself. Have fun. As we're sort of coming out of the pits and warming our tyres up, one of the most obvious visual things players will notice are new driver animations. So, yay! I've now got a decent degree of rotation on the hands and wheel, which is awesome. Normally, as I am today, if I'm driving on a single or a triple screen setup, I'd have wheel turned off in-game. But for the virtual reality players or those that like to keep on an in-game wheel, this is quite... Hello? Apex? Anyone know what Apex is? It's over there somewhere. We'll try and do that better next time. So yeah, nice new driver animations on this car, and I believe on the other GT3 cars as well. So that's a big improvement, something we've been looking for quite some time now. Short shifting a little bit, just to get the tyres warmed up, not to go too fast too soon. A lot more lively, these cars as well. Really quite interesting to feel them. I'm also, as many of you will know, a bit of a VR fanboy, so for me to be back on a screen is something I've not done for quite a while, and it all feels rather peculiar. Although I must say, the improvement in graphics from being back onto a screen setup compared to what it is in VR, very noticeable. Game looks exceptionally crisp, looks beautiful at the moment, and I'm only running GTX 980 Ti, so I've definitely got, with a better card, more headroom to ram up the graphics somewhat compared to what they are now and make it look even sweeter. But I think we'll all agree, for a DX9 title, R3E looks spectacular. Right, I'll shut up now and let you enjoy the car.
You know you're absolutely destroying the engine here, Paul.
I know, like, talking and driving's hard.
You've already like half destroyed it.
I ain't got smoke, I'm alright. Everybody likes to listen to the noise of it bouncing off a rev limiter.
So, compared to the current GT cars, though, Paul, how does the new Callaway actually feel?
Lively. it's. I mean, obviously, I am sadly. Feel free if any racing teams are listening to offer me a drive. Have no experience in a real life GT3 car, but it's exactly what I would kind of anticipate it to be. It's compliant and it feels almost docile when not at the limit, which is where I'm at the moment. Obviously, just bringing the car in, getting used to what I'm doing. But then when you start to sort of reach that envelope, you start to reach that kind of like last tenth, last metre of braking, or you ask a little bit too much of it going into a corner or on the throttle coming out, that's when it sort of like really comes alive compared to what I thought they did previously. I thought they felt a little bit hello, I thought they felt a little bit planted. Excuse me. And now they really feel quite alive. It's quite an exciting drive actually. I would say they're a considerable improvement, and they feel very, very much like the Porsche that we test drove at Germany at Sim Racing Expo.
Well, you say we. I didn't.
The Royal We of Race Department.
But wait, I can't wait for them to come out. Actually.
yeah, very much so. They're really good. I think we'll find a lot of people find quite a big improvement over what were already really good cars to start with, but these do feel significantly different and significantly better in my opinion. And of course it sounds absolutely glorious, as always.
It's like Racing's the best when it sounds. There's almost no reason to ever comment on the sounds because you just know that they're going to be fantastic.
Yes, it's well done Anthony and team. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh, there we go. Nothing a little bit of lift-off braking can't resolve. Yeah, well done once again, Anthony. Exceptional. I saw a on Sector 3's Facebook page many moons ago. They had a mic in one of the Callaways at a test session in Germany somewhere. So obviously, as always, these are captured direct from source, the audio in this, and you can tell it sounds mint.
And for people asking in chat, is stock set up purely because Paul has no idea how to set up cars?
Yep, absolutely. I haven't got the foggiest how to set a car up. I wouldn't even begin, I just make them worse. I've no idea at all. So that's why it's stock setup. Although I will say, jokes aside, not a bad setup at all, this as standard. It's very raceable. I mean, I'm by no means a particularly quick driver, but for me, yeah, this is a very competent baseline for people. I hate that chicane. Yeah, it feels it's quite a neutral setup. Maybe a little bit of understeer now. When I turn it into the mid-corner understeer, you can feel it just wash out midway through, which is half a product of me overdriving and asking too much of the car. Partly the physics where it feels like I've got a little bit more weight, or more realistic representation of weight, should I say, compared to maybe pre-patch cars would be. It definitely feels like you need to do more with the car to get it to do what you want. Oh God, why can I not brake on time? You need to do more with the car now than you needed to do before, over and above just simple point and squirt, which is nice. If anybody's ever tried streaming to a live audience while driving a car that you've never driven before on a track that you're not familiar with, this really is quite challenging. This is not a representation in any way, shape or form above my ability and the quality of driving that you'll find at racedepartment.com.
I was going to say, I do this almost daily, have to stream whilst learning a car and a track. And
I don't know how you do it. I remember I did a club race, Joe, that you were commentating and streaming, and I was like, it was the Assetto Corsa Bar 500s, and I were on a pole lap. I was doing really well, and you were commentating within TeamSpeak. And it's like, oh, we're on board with Paul Jeffrey now. Well, that's it. I've got no idea what I'm doing. I don't know where corners are. I don't know how to brake. I've never seen an Apex in my whole life. It just sort of like plummeted down the grid the second I know I've got eyes on. So, anyone in comments got any questions for us while we wait for Alex to arrive?
We've asked how you are not familiar with Silverstone. Being a British driver, is this blasphemy?
No, I refuse to play any British tracks until they've got Donington. Looking at you, JF.
What are you so against any other British circuit until they got Donington? I mean,
because it's not Donington.
I'm sure that there are a few games that have Donington out there. Surely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd really like touring cars at Donington. That's a combination made in heaven.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. We can indeed.
Hear Alex.
Oh, amazing, brilliant, fantastic. Hi guys.
So everybody, Alex, welcome. This is we're live. I'm on track at the moment at Silverstone. Welcome.
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
At last,
How are you finding
eventually.
It? What are you in? I'm not streaming yet. I've literally just restarted.
I'm in the Callaway at the moment.
Update me, great. Straight in the new one.
Yes, straight in the new one, and it's
Brilliant.
Beautiful. Absolutely
Fantastic.
bloody beautiful.
Great. Well, Callaway have been a real help. Most of the stuff that's going on with that car, all the chassis setup and the engine physics, are literally Callaway numbers. They are literally, that is what the car does. There's no
nice.
guessing. There's no sort of fudge work. It's literally that is what the engine torque curve is like. It's literally exact, and that is exactly what the dampers are like, and they're exactly the strings that that car runs, and all the suspension ratios and the damping rates and things like that are exactly spot on.
So
as well as the aero and brake sizes and all that sort of stuff, it's all exactly the numbers.
So it's fair to say then that Callaway have been very cooperative with Sector 3 during this build.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, brilliant, really good. You know, right up to the top man there. They've, from what I understand, they've actually been running our car on their test rig, and they're extremely happy. So I think pretty much the first thing that I did was send across to them my work, and they were like, well, this is great. Just change a little bit here and a little bit there, and we're really on to a winner with it. I mean, the only thing that was it was a little bit interesting. You can imagine these race teams being competitive. They want their car to be the best, so they tried really hard. Like, can you just give it a little bit more power, maybe a little bit more downforce, you know, because they want it to be the one that's winning all the races in our sim. So that's the only thing that we had to just go, maybe not.
Well, actually, it's an interesting point. I would assume then, with the new physics, obviously across the board for the GT3s, have you been doing some balance of performance work with the new cars and the existing GT3 cars, and sort of how's that working out?
Yeah, so what I've done actually is basically done a restart. So as much as this is sort of going to be viewed as an update and a step forward, I've literally like pressed the reset button and started from scratch with everything.
Oh, nice.
So the cars were very good before, don't get me wrong, but I noticed one or two traits that weren't quite right, and rather than trying to just sort of tweak and eventually get there, it was very much a case of like, actually let's just clear the screen and let's just start again. And I think that the biggest thing that's come out of it is the inertia and the feel of the actual weight transfer in the car is a lot greater than it was before.
That's interesting. You should say that actually, Alex, because just speaking with Joe before you came along, I was saying it very much feels like there's more usable weight in the car, and that you've got to do a little bit more setting the car up into a corner rather than the more traditional sort of point and square kind of experience we had before.
I mean, I guess the guys listening in might be quite interested to know where I came from and what my sort of lead into Sector 3 in this role was.
Yes, indeed.
So I'll talk about it a bit. So actually, I come from working in real motorsports, and I've made the jump across to sim racing. And my background in real motorsports is, well, I used to do a lot of kart racing. In fact, I started racing. My first race was won by Lewis Hamilton, so it was that long ago.
Oh, wow.
When I was about 11 or 12. And I raced that quite seriously and won 5 championships in the UK in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Oh.
And then I went on to car racing and I raced Formula Ford a bit. And then I went and did some GT racing, sort of club stuff, nothing sort of high level. Had a go in a few pretty impressive historic Group C cars.
Oh.
Didn't race them, had a go, but it was tantalisingly close. So that was a Nissan MPT90.
Oh, nice.
Which is a real piece of kit. And, you know, to an 18-year-old that was racing a Formula Ford, it was really like, my eyes were like saucers driving that thing. And because of that experience, I was, you know, so sort of blown away by that car. I wanted to recreate it in sim racing because, as well as doing the real stuff, like a lot of guys do now, I got into the sim racing so I could practice at home.
Yeah.
So I grew up on Grand Prix Legends, and then went to F1 Challenge and sort of did a little bit of modding work with that, but not very much. And then I got into R Factor, and the first thing that I did in R Factor that actually got me into the modding and now actually sort of working on the physics side is there's a big Group C mod for F1 Challenge by Virtual Le Mans VLM, and I thought it'd be a really good idea to get that into R Factor, and I basically just said, well, how do we do it, and kind of worked it all out, really sort of how to go about it. And that thing grew and grew and eventually became a massive, called GTPC for R Factor. And I ended up doing all the physics files for that, and that was something like 84 cars that we ended up doing in the end. We went completely crazy. We were just completely in love with the Group C cars and just thought, well, let's do them all.
Why not?
Yeah, so then back to what I was saying about the sort of real racing side of things. Off the back of doing my own racing, I started teaching on track days and driving experience schools. So I've worked at Silverstone Race School and various racing schools in the UK. And the job there is real risk money. You're sat in the passenger seat of someone that's paid to drive a Ferrari 430 or an Aston Martin, you know, any sort of fast supercar around a track, and I'm there to help them get the most out of it and really just sort of egg them on and teach them something and let them have a proper good go at it. So typically we'd be doing 160 miles an hour down the hangar straight at Silverstone in a Ferrari 430 with a complete stranger next to us.
But a novice at that. Yeah.
In the passenger seat.
Oh man. So it's fair to say then that you've got a bit of a need for speed.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh yeah. So one of the real important things that I learnt at quite an early age when transferring from karting to cars is that weight transfer is the biggest tool that you use. And I think that that's something that's missed in a lot of sims, in that they sort of can handle like karts, like you turn the wheel and it turns. But you don't drive like that. You drive a real car by really having to manage the weight transfer. So trail braking is absolutely like the key to going quick in a car on a track. It's how you get the corner speed into the apex. Yep. So I felt that was a bit lacking as things were. I looked at why, I looked at the reasons why, and this is what I've come up with. So yeah, so weight transfer and actually using the trail braking and managing the weight is more of an art and is more of a factor, and that's how it should be. So if that's what you're feeling, then that's great. I'm really happy with that.
Absolutely. That was that's pretty much. I mean, because of the timings of when we agreed to do this and going live and family life and all that good stuff, I've not really had any sort of practice in these cars, so these are very much my first few laps, and that's the first thing that immediately stands out to you, that the car, it's a lot more, it feels like, how do I describe it, just a lot more alive, where I sort of said to Joe earlier, I feel like when you're not driving it at the limit, when you're sort of 80 to 90 to 95%, it's quite a compliant car. It feels quite tame almost, like one would imagine a GT3 car to feel. But then when you start to get to that fine envelope performance and you're pushing for that last metre under braking, or you're trying to get on the throttle sort of a couple of metres earlier out of the corner, that's when sort of life comes into the car, and it feels like you've got to do more than just point and squirt to get it in. Otherwise you're getting, I'm noticing in this default setup, a little bit of mid-corner understeer, where if I'm pushing a little bit too hard, the front end's beginning, it's got an initial bite and going into the corner all right, and then starting to come away from me a little bit and push further and further on from the apex, which is something I don't think we had before. It felt, always felt a little bit, I don't want to use the word canned, because I don't want to say that the physics were bad before, they weren't, they were fantastic, but it almost felt a little bit like the car would do what I would like it to do. Quite easily. Like now, coming, hey, there, a little bit too much throttle, and it's quite a, it's quite organic how it slides, and you feel like you can catch it a little bit easier than maybe you could have done before, which again is how I believe GT3 cars really, potentially, should react. Going on to the refresh that you've made of the whole GT3 set, how difficult did you find it unpicking what had been done before on the older cars, and sort of, these are a 2017 generation of car, and then we've got the older ones like the Z4 in there as well. Is there been a lot of research and work had to go into getting the feel right and then balancing them with the more modern machinery?
Yeah, it's been very, very hard. I mean, because it's the the SRO, who balance the cars anyway all the time, as we know, everything's published. So actually, quite a large amount of what they do to balance the cars, when they add weight, when they put a power restrictor in, when they limit revs, actually works really. It takes us probably 90% of the way there. I really focused on the extremes. So the extreme cars that we've got the Camaro at one end, which is a huge tank car basically, and you know, at the other end we've got the brand new Audi R8, and we've got this C7, which are both real good aero cars. And actually I found that the more I learnt about it, the more I realised that because of the way that the GT3 cars are balanced, and really because of the sort of target audience, because you've got to remember that GT3 is basically a gentleman drivers class. They're the ones that are paying the bill, so all the development goes towards drivability and actually making them lower maintenance and easier to drive. So the newer cars have got more downforce and less power, so they actually become a little bit, well, quite a lot easier to drive. Over a lap, it's fairly sort of straightforward to balance them. You just kind of add 10 kilos here, maybe restrict the power a little bit much, but yeah, but it's doable. It's very hard. You end up with cars with very different attributes. You know, as we saw before in the previous generation of the physics, the Camaro was an absolute straight line monster. When I've sort of dug a bit more, that was probably a little bit too extreme. So it has got actually the same downforce as before, but with a bit more work on the dampers and a bit more work with this weight transfer that I was talking about and the tyres, it's actually quite pliable. But it's not an R8.
Yeah, well, and that's the beauty of GT3 racing, I suppose, with such a wide variety of cars, manufacturers, design philosophies. There's a bit of something for everyone there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course we see in the real GT3 racing as well, I don't know how closely you follow it, but over the last few years, teams have actually been choosing different cars for different circuits. So, where traditionally a team might be an Audi team all year, they'll think, well, actually, next weekend, let's get the Merc out. Yeah,
yeah. Going back to yourself a little bit, we'll come back to the cars and the physics later on. JS says you've got an interesting story as to how you kind of came into connection with Sector 3. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of how you fell on the S3 radar and what brought you to the middle of Sweden?
Well, it was quite out of the blue, to be perfectly honest. So I had just released that mod. We'd put it out probably 3 years ago, something like that. I still sort of kept my ear to the ground, did a little bit of sim racing, and kept in contact with Anthony, our Sam and Anthony, who did help us out a bit before. And he just sort of happened to mention, "Oh, would you be interested in doing this?" But well, yeah, that sounds really good, because as good as the instructing and the sort of coaching job sounds, it does involve a lot of travelling, and it could typically involve jumping on a plane to fly up to Knockhill for 2 days, and then I'd have to go to Belgium for the next day, and which is great.
So that sounds wonderful.
To an extent, yeah. But so the chance to sort of take something on and for it to like be my baby is really, you know, I'd like to pick something up and improve it and mould it and sort of keep moving forward and develop it is was really interesting to me. So I'm really happy. Yeah, everyone's great. Jean-Francois was very lenient, very easy to get on with everyone. So it's a real nice environment and lots of interesting things going off behind the scenes.
Yes, I can imagine. So in terms of like physics and whatnot, is that solely your domain, or do you have a small team that work alongside it? How's it sort of structured over there?
So the physics, at the moment there are 2 of us. I'm doing, that is all that I'm doing. But a lot of the other guys will sort of dip into one area and then have another go at another area. And of course the BMW that was released not that long ago, none of that was me at all.
Yeah. And that's a lovely car, actually. That is a really lovely little car. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. Saved it. We've got the Callaway Corvette that I'm driving at the moment, and also the Audi and the Mercedes are the 2 new cars that are coming in. What's been your personal favourite to work on, and sort of why?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm going to probably go back to that Camaro, just because I really like a challenge, actually, and just sort of work out, well, how are we going to do it? How are we going to make this thing work? Was really very, very interesting. Yeah, like that's what I'd say. I'd have to give you quite a short answer to that, really.
Because it's not really got a lot of European finesse to it, that car, has it?
No, not at all. I mean, everything's very interesting in its own sort of way. I'm just looking down our car list again right now. I mean, yeah, really, that's what I'd say is my own personal favourite, really, just because it's so sort of different and dark, really.
Well, can you give us, I mean, not everybody watching today or catching up later on YouTube will sort of understand what goes into making physics for a car. Can you give us some sort of like indication? Are we talking masses of spreadsheets and calculations and maths and data, or how does one go about transferring a real life hunk of metal, carbon fibre, rubber and plastic into a virtual environment like this?
Oh, so we're talking spreadsheets. We're talking absolute serious spreadsheets. Something like, right. So I've got a spreadsheet there that's half a meg spreadsheet. There's one of those per car. So what I will typically do is just initially is just gather data all that I can. I start off by the sort of mechanicals of the car and looking at the suspension. There are so many variables. The suspension plots, and then I move on from that and start to think about the dampers, the anti-roll bars. Now, I'm working really hard, and I'm still sort of almost not quite done with it. On a big tool that I can kind of put the numbers in and fiddle with it. At the moment, I'm really happy with everything that's happened with the GT3 cars, but it's been the hard way, basically, because it's been a case of, right, let's work this out, and it's been calculated from pen and pad and a really hard roundabout way of doing it. But I mean, if you want to if you wanted to know any of the numbers about any one of the cars, I could tell you like that. There's no guesswork involved. For the aero side of things, we've got a really good tool that we use. We've got a test track internally that's just a long straight. We have a special development mode that tells us the numbers and the drag and the aero figures and stuff like that. And I drive the car along the track at 250, 300 kilometers an hour. And I just match up the numbers basically.
Okay.
In terms of that, so I can get the aero absolutely spot on. The real hard work, the really hard work, was the tyres.
Yeah,
and obviously that's a common theme in sim racing. So I've obviously got a bit of experience of driving cars with slick tyres, and they are naturally quite unforgiving, I've got to say. Although I have to strike a balance here, because if something is too realistic, if that makes sense, and it's really unforgiving, it becomes not fun. So what we've got here is it's a realistic, believable slick tyre, but just with a tiny little bit more give. So when you talked about before the car sort of moving around and giving you a little bit of a warning, it's got that. Yeah. Whereas it's not quite as snappy as it would naturally be. And I could go that extra step and I could make the cars snappy and behave like that, but it might just take a little bit away when you're actually having a real close race with someone and you just get a bit of a sideways movement going on. If it's gone, they've gone. Yeah. So it keeps the fun in it by having just a bit of sort of give.
And so are all that like data that you gather from the different cars. We've got open wheelers, touring cars, GT cars, and a variety of things in between. All this data, you say, then, is what's gleaned from the manufacturers themselves, the teams themselves. So you're running real numbers in sim compared to what you sort of provided to you by the various different groups and organisations.
Yeah, so data comes from all over the place. As I just go through some magazines and things that I've got right here. So Race Car Engineering, very good magazine.
Yes.
And it just so happens in the middle of this Race Car Engineering, it's got a 3-page spread all about a Formula Ford in a wind tunnel. So how useful is that?
Perfect. Yeah.
It's the effects of the downforce and the drag and what happens when the nose lifts and dives and that sort of thing. I've got another magazine right here all about an Aston Martin Lola LMP1, and again it's got all the wind tunnel data in that. So it's just a case of like the information comes from everywhere, and what you don't know, just try to absolutely minimise that guesswork.
User
and just
disconnected from your channel.
Get as close as possible. Am I still in?
Yeah, you're still in. You're still in. It's just Joe. Joe dipped out for a minute.
Fair enough. Yeah, so that's how we go about it. Now, when it comes to actually dampers, that is another very hard thing. So it's very hard to compare sort of damper data between cars, because what might work on one car might work on another one that looks quite similar. For example, a damper from the Mercedes, you put that on the Z4, you think, yeah, that'll work, and it doesn't. So that's very much had to be tuned by feel to an extent, except for in the cars that we've got the real data for. So we've got the real data for the Mercedes, we've got the real data for the Callaway, and a few others. So yeah, so guesswork is minimal, but everything's derived.
Sure. So I suppose that real data then that you've got from Callaway, Mercedes and whatnot, that's helped inform your understanding as an organisation of car physics in race room, and there'll be knock-on benefits to that, one assumes, wider than just the GT3 car set that we've got.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, left to my own devices, I think I'd lock myself in a back room and probably reappear in about 5 years' time once I've overhauled everything. Maybe post something in the letterbox back to Sweden as an update every now and then. But yeah, absolutely. So when I go back and I look through other cars, I can quite often, well, almost all the time, pick out, oh, that needs to be different, that needs to be different, that needs to be different. So you can absolutely expect this is what is to be expected in these GT3 cars.
That's good. Is there an intention then, looking wider at race room in general, is there an intention to go back and revisit some of the cars with the new learnings that you've had, and maybe make tweaks to bring it more in line with the knowledge that you've got available today?
Well, yeah, I think there always has been. I think it's very much a case of time management with us. But yeah, absolutely, there's definitely an intention to revisit and update and put these new learnings in. Yeah. And yeah, but of course we need to also keep one eye on the fact that we're moving forwards and we've got these interesting new projects in the pipeline that we're working on as well. So it's very much a case of, yes, we'd definitely want to go back and revisit, but let's see how many hours we can make out of our days.
And that's the thing, exactly. And obviously you've got KW on board as well. Sure, that gives you a bit of an advantage in terms of understanding how suspension settings would work. How's that partnership working out for you?
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, brilliant. So again, that's where a lot of our damper data comes from as well. Because at KW, they've got a lot of really interesting rigs for giving us information. So what they can do is they can put a car up on a 4-post rig, which is literally like an elevated rig, and they strap the corners of the car down and run the dampers up and down basically at different speeds, and they can plot exactly what the dampers are doing on the car at any one time.
That's useful.
Of course, with these things, information and data is just one part of it. It's actually interpreting that data and learning how to get that and move forwards with it, which is the really hard part. But yeah, the feedback of the information is brilliant, absolutely fantastic.
I think that's kind of, to a point, what sets Race Room aside from some of the other sim racing rivals is close working relationships you have with people like KW, the teams, and also a number of drivers as well that you have coming off their advice and experience. How valuable do you find that?
Oh, that's brilliant. So, so we've run a number of sessions over the last few months and just invited drivers in. In fact, we had a recent interesting development last week that came in about something else that should be happening between now and the end of the year.
Pray tell, pray tell.
If only I could. So typically what we do is we'll run a session like this and do a sort of drive and talk, and it's literally like being at a racetrack as a race engineer, and we'll get someone in that knows the car really well that might be racing the car in that cup in Germany or France or whatever, and we'll run through and change the setup and talk about the attributes, and they might tell me, oh, maybe the traction's not quite so good, or the gearing seems a little bit off, and no, the top speed there is usually 260, not 262, that sort of thing. Yeah. And we just really like hone it in. So I get the car probably 95% of the way there, and then that trim and that really makes the difference and makes it spot on.
So you do find that there's a genuine benefit to this feedback?
Oh yeah, massively, absolutely, definitely. Yeah, absolutely, definitely, massively. Yeah, it's a real good, handy way to move forwards. Because as much as calculations and numbers and spreadsheets help, the actual driver element is massive. Quite interesting. I read something the other day going back to the tyres. A study. I'm sure you guys will be able to find it online. I wouldn't be able to reference it now. Someone's university study from about 2006 or 7, and what this person had done is they had been working in conjunction with an F3 team.
Yeah.
They'd made an F3 car for R Factor 2, gathered all the information together, and they'd really got stuck at the tyre model, because all the numbers that they gathered, when they put it together as a tyre model in the game, all the drivers said, well, that's not right. And that was the only sticking point. But once they started to actually just follow what the driver said, they were happy. And that's where the progress was come. So we need to we make sure that we have the information coming in, and we do the calculations, we do the numbers, and they make sense. But if the driver says, actually maybe that bit isn't quite right, then absolutely we listen.
Yeah, and I suppose that's an important part of the experience, is getting the feel behind the wheel right. That actually brings me on to an interesting point, because I've got what we're using at the moment, not the main public build, obviously, with the new cars in it. It refresh install for me. Been a while since I've took a GT car out in anger, and because of the timings and everything, I've not had time to set my wheel up to personal settings to match my public build, and it feels bloody great. Straight away, I'm in a Fanatec Club Sport wheel version 2. I've done nothing apart from select Club Sport wheel in the options and come into game, and the force feedback already feels in these cars difficult, because I'm not judging apples for apples, but feels far superior to what it was previously before the physics changes. Do you personally have any hand in how the force feedback translates to the physics on the cars? Or is that just a natural product?
Well, it's actually a natural product. So as much as I looked initially and I thought, oh, maybe we can do something to make the force feedback better, it just sort of happened. Basically, it was a real happy side benefit of the physics work. Quite a large part of the force feedback comes from the inertias of all the moving parts and the suspension moving up and down. I figured out that the calculations weren't quite right and the inertias were a bit low. So once I recalculated those, didn't just up them, I actually went back and pen and paper and redid it. The side benefit was that the force feedback improved. It just sort of happened. It was great. It was a real lucky find. And that's something that I can recreate quite effectively and quite quickly with all the other cars that are in the system at the moment. So you can expect this to be something that continues.
That's good, because like I say, difficult for me to make a fine judgment on it, because I'm not running the exact same settings that I run on my sort of public build. But the cars instantly do feel brilliant. I can feel, for me, what's always the hardest part, I can feel the front and the rear of the car, and I can feel what's happening on both ends, which I don't think is necessarily something that always is always the case with other simulations. And Race Room's always been good force feedback, but this has really taken it to another level, coupled with the physics updates. I think it's quite quickly pushed the GT3 class to the top of the field here.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Break here. No, thank you. I'm enjoying this. So, I assume then that you're responsible, Alex, for physics in the game in its entirety and not just sort of concentrated on GT3. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you'll be. Don't suppose you can sneakily tell us what your next project is, can you? Or is that all hush hush?
Well, it's pretty hush hush actually. We're working on some different classes of cars. I can tell you that.
Good. That's about as much as I'm going to get out here on that one, so I'll swiftly move on. Have you got much sim racing background then, in terms of, obviously you say you've worked on the Le Mans GTP mod and have been in F1 Challenge. In terms of driving, what sort of experiences do you have in sim racing? We know you've done some real world as well, but how does that transfer onto virtual racetrack? Are you a keen sim racer yourself?
Well, actually, strangely, no, not really. Not to any sort of great extent, I've not really particularly raced in leagues. To be honest, I've always been too busy to. Probably the last amount of real serious racing, sim racing that I did was Sean Edwards, rest in peace. You know, Carrera Cup GT racer guy, was quite a good friend of mine, and he was a very quick guy. I used to race really seriously with him, sim racing all the time, and do quite a lot of leaderboard challenges. And wherever he went, I went. I basically used to just sort of follow him and use him as a yardstick, because of the real racing stuff as well. So I've remained active in sim racing. I've always done it, but sort of online competitions, in a strange way, I kind of grew up with my sim racing before it socially, sort of the online social side of it, became big and blew up. So I've almost stuck in my ways, and I'm still sort of circa 1999.
And it's easily done. I think esports, as it's so annoyingly titled, oh, he's off. He spins. Sorry, Dave. Esport, it's becoming a bit of a buzzword now. Large-scale online competitions and sim racing sort of growing as a whole. Do you find at Sector 3 the demand for you to do things differently or do things quicker to service need of a growing niche is putting pressure on the organisation itself and the capacity that you've got there to sort of churn out what has been a fairly fast rate of new products? Or new DLC, should I say?
Well, me personally, I very much feel like the emphasis is on do it right and do it once.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line, really. And there isn't so much the pressure of it needs to be done yesterday, which is a real nice environment to be in. And it's allowed the GT3 cars to come out like this. You know, had we put really pied the pressure on and decided that these wanted to be out at the beginning of October, middle of September, they wouldn't be as they are now, because the rate of learning and the rate of development has been really steep, and it's only now that it's plateaued out, and I've realised, yeah, that's the way that it needs to be, that we're really ready to actually balance them. So this sort of balance of performance and making sure that the cars are within 1/10 of a second or so is only something that's happened over the last few weeks. Up until then, it's been develop, make them better. Just let's get them tuned in, and then we'll balance them. So, to summarise, to answer your question, no, there isn't really the pressure to get it done quickly. There's the pressure is to get it done correctly.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be, as we could tell from the car that's on the screen, announced in October 2016.
Yeah.
Out soon. Yeah, it's nice though. It's right. It's the right tactic, I think, to take to ensure that there's a good quality product, and the things that are learnt from it then feed into the next one, and the continual improvement. I think anyone listening today will agree. Race Room, as it stands now in November 2017, wildly different product from what we saw 1, 2, even 3 years ago. The way things have improved, the quality, the content, the quality of the physics and the driving experience. Slightly dubious camera that we've got going there, which is not a good example. There's some Silverstone seating for you there, people. That's what it feels like to be at we'll shift that camera angle. That's one for your beta testers. We need to change that camera.
Make a note. Make a note, guys.
Yep, that's really not working out well. There we go. A freshly spun Mercedes.
Very nice seating there anyway. The farmhouse building's behind that.
It is, but what it don't convey the real biting, freezing cold wind that you can get at Silverstone.
I know it well.
Yeah, that's Silverstone at any time of year is never a fun spectator opportunity. Although great circuit that it is. Well, talking about new content, we know that Porsche are coming to the simulation.
Yeah.
Have you had your sticky fingers on anything Porsche license-wise, and how's that side of things? When can we expect to see something, some fruits of that labour in public build?
So the intention is that Porsche is going to be coming to Race Room this year.
Superb.
I have had my fingers on it, indeed. Yeah, it's been great. It's very good. It's really quite well developed, actually.
Has it moved on any since the Cup car that I drove at the Sim Racing Expo for the Race Room Cafe competition? Have you
Yes,
progressed?
of course. I forgot about that. Yeah, I did watch your video.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we've developed it from there, definitely. We had a few sessions since then with a driver that races in Carrera Cup Germany. So that's that model car, this year car, and learnt a few things and realised that the brakes of that car actually were pretty severe and quite hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
And on paper that's how they were, but when we actually got the driver in session, he said, yeah, they are really hard work, and of course the car doesn't run ABS. It's got huge brakes. It basically runs a GT3 brake with quarter of the amount of downforce of a GT3 car, and no ABS, and no traction control. So and actually harder tyres. So it quite a handful. So yeah, it's very much got its own attributes. It's not a GT3 car at all. It's closer to a road car. But yeah, it's not a sort of GT3 class cup car. It's a class car. It's a very, very different experience to drive. But it's moved on. It's had a lot of work on it since then.
Yeah, because I mean, I loved it when we tried it at the cafe, and exactly what you said there with the brakes. Because obviously I was using different kit than what I've got at home. I think it was Logitech stuff down in the cafe, and I'm used to a load cell brake. I wondered if half of it was getting acquainted with different hardware, but I found the brakes were. I enjoyed it actually. There was a lot of work went into modulating the brake pedal, really sort of like trying not to snatch it too much, and then coming back off and then putting more pressure back on, and that were sort of a night and day difference from what I've seen in other cars in game. So we're saying that that's been sort of tamed slightly now.
Well, contrary to what I was saying about these GT3 cars, about the trail braking and how using the weight transfer is a really important thing. A bottom line that we got out of one of the drivers, well, a few of the drivers, is that if you have still got significant amount of brakes on whilst you're trying to get the steering lock on into a turn, the GT3 will lock its brakes, and it'll lock it pretty severely. So you do probably 80-90% of your braking in a dead straight line, and then you want to be off that brake before you start to think about getting the steering lock on. So it's still very much an attribute. It's still something that the driver is going to have to get used to. It's there, but it's not quite as harsh. It's a bit more forgiving than it was before. Of course, the byproduct of that is that you'd eat through tyres as well, which would be a little bit...
Not quite in keeping with the endurance principles that were... I did wonder. I mean, I personally really enjoyed it, but I did wonder what kind of backlash there'd be if that was sort of what the end result build were going to be like. Because it very different experience, but wonderful car, and obviously sounds beautiful. The model's great, as it always is. What's Porsche been like as a manufacturer to work with in terms of data sharing and validation at what work that you're doing?
Yeah, good. What they have typically done is they've said, talk to these guys. They've put us in contact with a team or a person that's sort of quite prominent and important, and basically given them the rights to transfer information towards us. So that's what Porsche have done.
So they've given you quite a nice packet of data for you to sort of take on the same.
Yeah, I mean, Porsche actually as a company is quite transparent in what they do. Okay. If you just do a quick Google, you can find out quite a lot about a Porsche Cup car, and I mean even the aero data and engine torque curves and sort of tyre compounds and brake sizes and all things like that, you can actually find on Google. Pretty quickly, pretty easily, just simply because that's the nature of how Porsche work. I think as a company, typically they seem to be like that. Whereas, I mean, if you were to compare say the Porsche LMP1 project to say the Audi LMP1 projects, you'll always see that the Audi project was very much like behind closed doors and hard to find information out, whereas Porsche would always be saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, and that is really how we found Porsche be with us.
Which I suppose that's exactly what you need to represent their products in game sufficiently, and to be a good like sort of one-to-one correlation with real life. Just moving away from the more recent content in GT3, you got a range of Formula Race Room open wheel cars. Not specifically, in every case, not specifically tied into a real world series. So there's an element of fantasy there.
Yep.
What sort of data have you used to influence the decisions that you've made physics-wise with that? Appreciate it before your time, but sort of looking back through files, is there bits of information and data taken from real world series, or have you allowed your imagination and sort of creativity to go wild with these?
Well, from my experience and what I've seen, it's very much been let's just have fun with it and let's just make it what we want it to be. As you can see by the top class Formula car, it's what we think it should be, really, and I think a lot of people agree. So it's been very much a case of with those cars, from what I can see, of let's just make it fun and make it what we want it to be.
But I heard a story from someone on that front that when you launch Sepang at the same time as the Grand Prix, I believe Mercedes drivers had a go in it and sort of kind of said that's the most realistic representation experience that they've felt up to that point. So it shows that even having a bit of fun and using your interpretation, you've got quite a close product to reality on that.
Yeah, not naming any names, but those videos were really fun for all of us. Yeah, when we first saw them, we all had big grins on our faces. That was such a great thing to say. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it shows that the physics engine is great, and it's definitely not anything that's broken, and it's not anything that really needs any tweaking. We can make anything from, if we wanted to, a kart all the way up to a Formula 1 car, a Group C car, all these GT3s, and it's a real good flexible thing. So it can be whatever we want it to be. It's a real great thing.
Talking of the engine, I met with Chris and Alan Speed start of this year now, actually, about GTR3 project and sort of the use of Unreal Engine and what knock-on effect that might have for Race Room potentially going over to Unreal in the future. Does that have any implication for you from a physics standpoint? Is there anything that limitations in the current DX9 engine you use now that may open up some avenues for exciting stuff in an Unreal world further down the line?
Yeah, well, we don't know, actually. I don't know at the minute is the short and simple answer to that. What I can say is that I've very much made sure that all of my information and all of my sources and everything are very carefully catalogued. So if I had to go through and redo this in a slightly different way, I could do. Everything's there and documented. It's not going to be a case of, oh, where did I get that bit from again? Which would be an absolute nightmare. But yeah, I mean, I have a few sort of personal thoughts about the direction I'd like that to go in. But yeah, simply I don't actually know.
It's exciting though to know that there's opportunity for. I was changing cameras here, but it's exciting to know there's opportunity for some potential new avenues to be opened up, because obviously the engine you're using at the moment is quite an old engine. Race Room's been out since what, 2013, I think it is. How do you find it in general? Does it allow you the ability to do the kind of things that you want to do when building and designing these cars?
Yeah, I mean, we've got such a good team of programmers as well, that if there is anything, just a sort of little tweak that we maybe want to change the way that the turbo behaves, or add something a little bit different in that wasn't there before, we can do it, and we've got these different methods of working with things. But yeah, it's a very, very flexible thing. it's quite logical. It's nicely nicely mathematical. Yeah. It's all pretty well documented now, so we have very little guesswork. Well, no guesswork actually. We know what everything does.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a real good. It's a real good thing. I quite like working with it. You know, I'd like to move forwards, still working with this or something derived from this physics engine. I mean, of course, you feel these GT3 cars now, and you've experienced them, and they're good. So it makes sense to sort of just maybe evolve this a bit and not do anything drastic that's a big departure. Well, that's my own personal feeling.
Just incredibly well timed as we're talking about about the game and the engine. It's crashed. So
that's the computer. User error.
It is user error, absolutely. So I'm just going to load that back up and take opportunity to select a different car to drive, which is always useful.
Okay.
But yeah, that's amusingly poor timing. So here we go. We're firing back up again. I think a lot of
thoughts
that probably
thoughts on a car.
Oh, it's got to be Audi or Mercedes, so I'm not really sure. I'll have to have a... What do you think? Come on, tell me. As a man, no, I don't want competitions. Go back. I don't...
Let's get you in the... I'd like you to go in the... Try the rough.
Oh.
The roof. As I'm told it's pronounced.
Roof. Otherwise known as the Aldi equivalent Porsche. Let's be Sabine. Here we go. Sabine, she's always a good choice.
Where do we have it? Oh, there we go, at the top.
We do. It's all firing on. This is one that I've not been in for a long time. So this is
I'm keen for you to go in that.
Yeah, something a bit different. It's been a long time since I've been in this.
Now, the mistake that you made is you suggested a car, and I thought, well, let's go for something completely different.
Yeah, thanks. And everybody on Twitch is now going, pick the new ones. We've seen plenty of that on track, though. Let's try something.
Well, I'd like these guys to know and to see that the new ones are new, but the old ones are new as well.
Well, that's the thing, exactly. The model might be something that you recognise, but the experience will be far different. The build that we're running at the moment is obviously not a public build. Are you... Apart from a bit of balancing of performance across the different cars, are you now fairly satisfied that you've got everything as you need it to be, ready for push live?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So bar maybe a tenth or two in a couple of cars. What you see is what you're going to get.
Excellent. And can you tell us? Are you in a position to tell us when we might see a public build released?
Well, next week.
Oh, okay. Well,
so we're that close.
So very much the final furlong then.
Absolutely. So let's talk about another little thing that I've added in and made different. How are you finding that Porsche so far? Not Porsche, roof.
Roof. Yeah. So far, I'm just coming to my first real braking event, and yeah, feels very nice. Actually, this car feels remarkably lighter than the Corvette that I've just been in. So it feels quite a bit more flighty, and there's quite a bit more fine movement at the steering. The Corvette, you felt a lot like it's a lot heavier car, and the steering was dampened accordingly for the weight. But this one does feel a little bit more like it's sat on its tiptoes, which is nice.
Yeah, so
it's a nice difference.
So these rear engine cars, I wanted to go in this because the engine's hanging out the back, so it feels completely different.
Yeah.
And you'll notice a little bit of front end bounce, which is typically a feature of cars like that. Another little thing I'm quite pleased. It's a small little detail that I've added in. You notice when the driver changes gear, when you change gear, the hand comes off and goes to the gear lever.
Yes.
Now that to me, when I see that's a manual sequential gear change, which isn't as quick as a paddle shift. So if you just compared the gear change time on this to say the GTR, they're not quite the same. They've just got slightly different attributes in how quickly they change gear, which is just a little detail which to me, spending hours and hours and hours with these cars, I just wanted to just make sure that there were just all these little details that were just different between them, and that might make a difference if you were in a side-by-side race with someone else. Just that slower gear change might well mean that they pull away. So, but over a lap, the lap times are balanced.
And that's the kind of detail that I think community in general really appreciates and enjoys. The little attention to detail that's gone into the smaller things like that. It's a lovely car, this one, Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite light at the front end in terms of weight, but these cars have really got a very, very good turn in, and you'll find as well that the traction is absolutely fantastic. So
yeah.
Out of the slow turns, as it should be, when you get hard on the gas, the thing will just squat and launch like a dragster.
Yeah, I've very
whereas
much
if you,
found that now.
but you have to, but again, but the other side to that is if you get on the power too early, the front end can just start to wash out. So you have to just drive the thing differently. It's not the same as a Z4. It's not the same as a Bentley.
And I think that's always been a strong point of Race Room for me, is the very different driving characteristics of the different cars, either within class or different classes. You really do feel, although I've got no real world point of comparison, I do feel as though I'm driving a whole different vehicle from a whole different brand now compared to the one I were doing previously. And that's refreshing to see that. It's nice to see that that's remained, even if there are subtle differences in the kind of feeling that you get.
I really enjoy I'm watching the windscreen wiper flap about. I really enjoy that little feature. I know that's something that's been there and been with us for a while, but it's just one of those things that in a real car really annoys me. But to see it in our sim, I really enjoy it.
Well, I think bloody track limits. I can't keep the thing on between the white lines. If you're watching Mr. Jackson, that one's for you. Yeah, this is a hell of a lot lighter feeling car, and really, yeah, I'm really enjoying this actually.
And the aero for this car, of course, if you look at the back of it, it doesn't have bigger wing, so it's not got so much downforce compared to what you've just driven.
Yeah.
It's a bit more of a straight line speed sort of car, and that's again why it feels a little bit lighter as well, because that aero load does actually load up through the front wheels and in turn make the force feedback heavier.
And also it's an older tech car in the real world as well, so as you say, it's got a more dated set of aerodynamic principles to it than say a brand new 2017 Callaway would have, which is the one that we've just been in. Have you?
Yeah, for sure.
Have you found then during sort of your development phase and understanding the simulation and understanding the physics that have been in the past and the data that you then get access to with the new cars, have you found that they were fairly spot on before and it's just the small changes, or have you made like huge sea changes to the way they behave, the older content in the GT3 pack?
Sorry, what the cars aside from these GT3s?
Specifically these GT3s, so sort of looking back at this one that we're in now, obviously this was brought into the game quite a while ago, and have you found with the new information that you've got since you started that what they'd done before, although I appreciate you've took it a different direction, the raw data there was pretty much spot on, or have you sort of kind of like toned the whole thing up?
It has been a bit of a tear up, to be perfectly honest. Touched before on sort of how intuitive the car is to drive, and it's sort of 80% how it just feels like a car that you could go to the shops in, really. That was a thing, that was a real sort of bugbear of mine, that if you just drive if you're just driving a car sort of 70 miles an hour around a track, it shouldn't bite.
Yeah.
But I really found that there would just be the odd low-speed spin, mid-speed spin that shouldn't really happen because you're not really trying. You know, with a big fat slick, it just shouldn't happen. So it really has been quite a big teardown, because it was a case to begin with of looking why it did that, and then you end up with a sort of crazy matrix of, well, if that does that, then that does that, and you know what affects A affects C affects Z affects X, and and before you know it, you've changed everything. So yeah, very much a case of like tear it down. One of the tests that I do, and everyone will laugh at this, I'm sure. So my girlfriend drives a road car about, nothing to do with motorsport at all. When I've worked on a car for a while and I think it's getting pretty good, I'll sit here in the driver's seat, say, drive that for half an hour. Now, she drives to work every day, 40 miles, and doesn't crash all the time, doesn't have spins, so why should she in the sim if she's just driving about? So I put her in the driver's seat and say, go drive, and she can drive laps of the Nürburgring of Nordschleife without any sort of silly spin or anything odd happening. And to me, that was really important, to make it just actually intuitive.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I think if I asked my wife to do that, she'd not be my wife much longer. I've tried desperately to get her interested. She really don't care.
Well, as punishment, I get put on the back of a horse, so if that makes you feel better.
That does, actually. That makes me feel a lot better. Yeah. Luckily, I don't have that. I have soft furniture shoppings. I think we're on board. I've just having a break from the driving and letting. We're doing a lap here with one of the Mercedes cars.
Yep.
Out of all.
Yeah, so
go on, carry on.
No, after you.
No, you're all right. Go.
After the roof, are you thinking of let's go for another one? Do you think?
Yeah, we can give it another try. Let me get back out on circuit and do a couple of laps after my childishly embarrassing spin.
Yeah, so you'll find that that car, the roof, being a little bit like a sort of, you know, older style car, and particularly these rear engine cars like this, they were always quite notorious for lift off oversteer, because they have quite a soft front end, which means that when you lift off, the weight just sort of sits forwards, and that's why it's so good on the turning. And when you're off throttle just there and you're turning, it just bites. It does mean that if you're going through a quick turn and the car's pretty well balanced, and then you just raise off the throttle just a little bit, it can be quite brutal. But you learn, and once you sort of adapt and you realise that that's an attribute, you can deal with it. But
and it's like any kind of racing. You get under the skin of the car that you're driving, and you learn what the little quirks are and what advantages they can sort of to make for yourself when you drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just see that little bit of front end bounce, just as which is a feature.
Yeah.
Which is something that all the time you see with with these cars on track. I mentioned that I worked at Silverstone Race School, and that is typically something that you'd see all the time. It's they're always known as a wheel waver, as in they lift up the inside front wheel mid-turn. Which is also
it's a famous thing in a touring car as well.
Yeah, for sure.
If you've not got a front wheel lift in a touring car, then you're not going. You're not set up all fast enough.
Exactly.
Actually, on setups, is that your ballpark as well? Creating the default setups, because they do feel. Yeah. I have no knowledge on how to set a car up at all, and the default settings on these are all very drivable, very raceable.
Yeah, so what I've actually done with the default setup is I've edged on the side of ever so slight understeer mid-turn, because I want them to be cars that anyone could just really get in and drive. And like as they would do in a real GT3 car, I have for a lot of the cars I have the base setup, and all of them are just, when you can sort of just read the numbers, edged towards being just slightly understeer, because that's the safest. Because we all know that with a little bit of understeer, quite often, like what I've just said, lift off a little bit and the front end will get its grip back. But when you've got a slight amount of oversteer, that causes maybe a newbie driver, maybe a gentleman driver who's just sold his company for millions of pounds and wants to go racing. It can cause them all sorts of problems. So yeah, so these default setups are just slightly understeery deliberately. Fairly easy to dial it out. You would simply soften the front anti-roll bar, maybe take a little bit of wing off the back, soften the front dampers. Yeah, and you end up with something that's fairly neutral. But in endurance racing, actually, typically they tend to set up a car that's a little bit understeery anyway, just because by the time the driver's tired after 3 hours of, well, let's say 4 3-hour stints, they just need a little bit of a leeway. But yeah, a little bit of understeer is just there.
So is it fair to say then that the setups that we've got in Race Room are fairly reflective of how one would set up the real world equivalent?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. A qualifying setup would typically be a little bit more pointy, a bit more on edge. It might be the quickest thing over a lap, it might be the quickest way of getting heat into the tyres, but to actually race with it would just be simply too tiring, because you'd be swinging away at the wheel and working really hard to keep the car under control. So typically a qualifying setup would be a bit more edgy, and a race setup would just have a little bit more compliance and just a little bit more forgiving. It wouldn't sort of bite your arm off if you made a little bit of a mistake. And also, when you're darting in and out of traffic, or you're letting other quicker cars go by, you don't want to be having sort of snapping sideways moments, because you could just end up sideways into someone else. Yeah, just a little bit of understeer is just safer, basically.
When you've had various real-world drivers coming in, sort of giving you help and advice with the physics and whatnot, have they ever tried any of their sort of tricks that they've employed in their real car in the sim, and does it sort of have kind of similar effects for them? And is there a little bit of sort of like correlation between real and virtual, that Bruno Spengler, for example, if he came in his DTM car and knows that he does X, Y and Z for the Norris ring, the same kind of thing sort of applies in game as well?
Yeah, so we had some real nice tests with the Porsche, and one of the focuses was the brake bias with the Porsche that you'd driven before. And what the driver told me is that with the fuel tank full at the start of the race, they'll run something like 53% front brake bias, but with the tank nearing empty, say 15 litres, it might be 48% front, so more of the brake bias on the rear. And that's how it works now for us. I basically calculated it, and he'd gone, yeah, that's right, which was really nice. It was a real good sort of pat on the back. Yeah. But yeah, so all the sort of the wing settings, we've got pretty good correlation. Yeah, which is really, of course, very nice.
Well, that's the ultimate test to how sort of close to reality you're running, I suppose. That if the same good and bad effects of making a setup change apply in game as in real world, you know you've got a pretty similar thing. Hello, hang on a minute, back to a big accident. Whoa! Hello. Of course, everybody likes doing 360s.
I'm a little bit behind in my viewing, so right,
you're
I've seen
about
it
to
now.
have, you're about to have another stupid moment. And this is actually interesting, that in the Callaway, never up, because it's a bigger car, heavier car, more planted, more modern, more downforce, I never fell in danger of going
Around
over
there,
the edge
yeah.
and spinning round. In the Porsche, okay, I'm talking, I'm not giving him 100% attention, but that's twice I've pirouetted really rather quickly, so that shows you rear engined, less downforce, lighter car, the differences between the two and the different driving styles that you need to employ for them as well. That this one's very much on the edge of danger, a lot more than say the other one would be.
Yeah. Sure. So, right, go on, get a lap together.
Yeah, let's do one flying lap, and then let's go for something different.
No pressure, but
Yeah.
what do we do? What 2:00 something?
Yeah, Dave's 2.5 seconds faster than me at the moment, which is most embarrassing. I'm thinking, what wheel driving? If I can get Terex 1.1, so maybe I can get him on this one. Now I've totaled my tyres.
Yeah, interestingly as well, the engine torque curves have been manipulated quite a bit, and basically just follow a line of a real dyno printout, just whenever possible, whenever I could find it. Which means that they're quite different actually. I think the biggest change that we had was the Alpina actually had really the wrong engine in before. It's quite a different thing now.
Okay. Well, I've met my target. I beat Dave because he's left the server. Being due to streaming this, I'm running the single monitor rather than the VR, and the amount of the less field of view that you have, it's very weird to get used to. Not being able to look to the side and see the apex.
Yeah, I found that the single biggest thing. You know, because on the driving experience, part of work that I've done, vision is everything, and you look down the road and look to the apex, and you simply can't do that with a single monitor. So you know, I noticed it mostly at probably Norris Ring, the very first turn.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Although Jean-Francois just told us that we can stream VR, but we'll stick to what we've got.
We can, but 2 hours talking with a VR headset on.
That's true.
Thanks. Yeah. Should also make for the slightly capture thing a bit boring with me having something strapped over my face. Not that you want to see my face, but yeah. Oh, it's all gone wrong. It's all gone wrong.
There's a part of me watching this onboard video. I want to sort of flick into coaching mode, but I won't. It's there in the background.
Old habits die hard, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that's actually still a Saturday job. I still do that.
I still do that.
Fridays and Saturdays, yeah. Yeah. So I like to. What that means really for racing is that, and the physics is that I'm in contact all the time. I've not put that down and forgotten about it. And I'll be doing some GT racing again next year. So I'm still active in motorsport.
Oh, what series will you be racing, and what car do you think next year? Do you know yet, or is it still too early?
Well, it looks like I'm going to be racing an M3 in
Nice.
Britcar.
Nice.
Which would be pretty nice.
Will you be doing the 24-hour Silverstone as well?
Funds permitting, yeah, it should be.
That's something I've always fancied.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my ultimate aim is really, I'd like to go and do some VLN racing. And thankfully, I've now got some really good contacts for that.
Well, if you ever want to do sim racer to reality. Always
that
remember
just
your
a little
favourite race department man. Oh, bloody hell.
Of course. So you could just see that understeer. Just if you get on the gas just a little bit early, it doesn't really kick the back. It just squats and goes. So you've just got to get your timing spot on.
Oh, hello. Right, well I think I'm going to blame it all on terrible balance of performance from Sector 3 Studios. They've really messed up. This rough's 2-3 seconds a lap slower than rested cars. It's not acceptable. It's nothing to do with my severe lack of ability at all. Let's see if we can get Mr. Adams before we go into something different.
Yeah, let's definitely think about something something different.
Yep. So one
Just
more
because-
push lap and then we'll chuck something new on.
Just because we've got so many. So at last count, we've got 19 cars. So that's quite a good GT3 field. That's a lot of choice.
Yeah, 19 cars. I mean, that's fantastic. How that's sort of grown on over time from being sort of like a secondary class. Because really, I think Sector 3, Simbin before them, and Race Room always synonymous with touring car and their World Touring Car license. But I think over time, GT3s have really started to take over now to become the primary sort of source of concentration for the studio. Right, Colin, Alex.
Yeah, of course.
What am I driving? What do you
Right,
think?
so
Tasty.
I think we've got a pretty popular demand going off. Right, let's try the Audi.
The Audi.
The one that everyone's asking for. The new one. So strangely, the Audis are named Ultra for the old one, but they dropped Ultra from the name for the new one.
Maybe it's just not as ultra as the old one is. Maybe it's just a standard. It's the LMS now, isn't it?
It's just LMS, yeah.
Hey, do you think we'll be getting the recently announced and shown new spec Audis and Bentleys and whatnot in the game going forward?
Say that again, Paul. Have I lost you?
Sorry. Do you think we'll be getting the new generation GT3 cars coming to Race Room in future? We've seen the new Bentley, looks very attractive, and a couple of others come out that I can't quite remember. Is that something you've got a desire to keep up with as a studio? The latest releases?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the new Bentley was shown first on Twitter, we collectively went, "Oh no!"
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely the intention. Yeah, we're making plenty of noises internally about wanting to keep up with the GT3. I mean, they're popular, so it makes sense to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that new Bentley does look fiercely delightful.
Oh, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's gone from being a bit of a boat-looking car to something that's really quite aggressive.
The Audi.
Yes, this thing sounds nice. Let's just listen to it go up through the gears.
Yeah, so this Audi as a car, it's got loads of downforce. It's nicely pliable. It's completely different to what you've just driven.
And I think that's very startling. The difference that you can feel. Oh, I mean, it's only an outlap on cold tyres, but the difference you can feel straight away. You can. This car feels immediately like it's happy to get up to and beyond the limit. And it's not going to do anything ridiculous to you. Well, there's a bit of understanding going off there into Beckett's.
Yeah, that's that little bit of just sort of natural understeer that I talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to what I was saying before, that the development of all these GT3 cars goes into making them easier and easier to drive, basically. And yeah, that's just how the regulations of GT3 lead the cars along. Strangely, as a car, I always find that when I come back to this Audi, and it's factually correct, it's how all the data stacks up, that it almost feels like you're not going that quick, and then you're at the top of the leaderboards. It's a bit of a strange one. The first thing that I did is watch a lot of videos, and I was really surprised by the top speeds, the speed traps at Spa, and the thing is something like 10-15 kilometers an hour slower than a lot of other cars. just because its balance of performance it's bopped right down basically, in terms of power, and makes up for it all with the downforce.
But it is a very compliant, as you say, compliant car, and doesn't feel too much like it's stressing itself going around the track. And I suppose when you, as you say, GT3 predominantly is a gentleman driver category, when you've got people of varying different skill sets, and you've got a simple, confidence inspiring driving car, a lot of lap time can come from the driver themselves rather than having a car that's on the very edge of speed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just by purely giving them the confidence that they can push, and the car doesn't feel like it's shifting too much under braking or through the corners. Ooh.
No, you can see it's got loads of downforce. I mean, I can see just immediately. It just looks. It's really quite interesting for me actually, just to watch it. I've never seen anyone drive and watch anyone drive the cars back to back other than myself. So, oh, and then a little spin.
And now we're in qualifying now, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, there we go.
Which means, I think, if memory serves me correct, we've got a 10-minute quali, and then is it a 20-minute or a 10-minute race? And then our time here is done. Alex, have you got the stream on Twitch on your screen?
I have.
Is there any questions you want to ask yourself that we can take, maybe? Or anybody that's listening, if you want to post any questions in the chat for Alex, or for me, if you've got any interest in what I've got to say. Probably not. Feel free to post some questions, please. Right.
So we did have a lot of requests for the Audi. That's why we're in that now.
Well, let's go take it out on track then. Oh, it's one-shot qualifying. Oh, wish I'd have known that before I put 8 laps worth of fuel in. I'm a little bit like David Coulthard. One-shot qualifying doesn't do no for me. I'm a build-up kind of guy.
Yeah, me either actually. It's usually about lap 3 or 4 for me.
Yeah. Lap 2 or 300 is normally my stronger one.
And you can see it's a lot less drama around all the the first 2 corners.
The whole thing, as you say, and that's actually the sign of a fast race car, don't feel like I'm putting any effort into driving. It's not doing anything unexpected. If anything, having just come off the back of driving the rough and others, I'm kind of turning in too early. And I'm kind of, in my mind, anticipating a problem where none exists.
So it's one of those strange things that's almost deceiving at first. You first drive it and think, "Well, this is quite easy. This is quite pliable." But then actually to really get the last nth out of it is really hard because it's almost sort of so forgiving. You have to actually try really hard to make the thing. It doesn't sort of feel like you're trying hard, like, as in the car's not moving around all over the place. You just have to really case of finesse and dotting the I's and crossing the T's to get everything absolutely.
It feels
maximised.
like potentially it's one of these cars that you need to drive like a low-powered car, keep your momentum going.
Yeah. And it's such a lovely endurance car. It's lovely.
Oh dear, I cannot drive. Right, how many laps of this am I gonna get, do we think?
So I've just seen a question that the Z4 is slow on a lot of tracks, a bit behind. Will the BOP be better? Yeah, we've put a lot of work into the BOP. So the Z4 actually, when I first rolled that out and some guys tried it, really positive straight away. So the Z4 that's one of my personal favourites as well. Actually, it's just a real nice. It's the lightest car in the class, and it's not got the most amount of downforce, but it's just a real nice sort of lively little thing.
It's a car I've always enjoyed across all sims. Z4. You say it's just it's got a bit of personality.
Yeah, it's a lovely little thing.
As the talking of BOP, as the Ford GT was renowned to be a little bit on the quick side, has that one either been removed from GT3 or toned down slightly comparatively?
Yeah, so I did have a few instructions actually about that, or a few requests of let's just calm the Ford GT down a bit. So it very much still feels like the Ford GT. It's sort of pretty basic because it's quite an old GT3 car. It's got the manual sequential box, so the gear change is a bit slower, but it's not gonna wipe the floor with the others. It's not gonna be the car of choice. Everyone's gonna have to forget about all their setups that they've got saved because we're starting afresh. I'm afraid, and they're gonna have to forget about which car they think is the fastest, and relearn everything. So you can really think of this whole GT3 class as a new start.
That's good to hear. Have you got? I know obviously license is not really your area, but have you got any intentions of bringing new manufacturers of the GT3 category into the sim in future?
I mean, I think we've got every intention of bringing all of them, but what actually materialises, yeah, we've got a few ideas, and there are a few things and sort of whispers that are said. So hopefully we can say more at some point, but yeah, the intention is definitely to like keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So obviously we've got a few new interesting. Actually, no, scratch that. Token of content, money, no question. Licensing, no issue. What car would you most like to work on? Virtual car.
Oh, that's a good question. So actually, I've still got very much a soft spot for these Group C cars and GTP cars. So if we could have a Nissan Group C car that made 1400 horsepower and had twice as much downforce as a modern F1 car, big fat slicks, and did 170 miles an hour flat out because it's got that much downforce and drag, that would be like the thing, a real beast that just wanted to bite your arm off.
With a H-pattern gearbox. Hey, heel and toe.
Yeah, with an H-pattern gearbox, yeah. Although actually the GTO car that we've got, the Nissan, is like quite closely related. It's the same sort of running gear in a different body shape. But yeah, that would be my. What a box of what a question to ask. So many possibilities. I did a lot of kart racing as well, as I said before, and the last few years of karting that I did was long circuit karting. So we raced on Donington and Silverstone and that sort of thing. I would be quite interested in working on something like that as well, because just the fun that you could have there was brilliant. I mean, you'd sort of do 140 miles an hour flat out, but almost every corner that you got to was like almost flat out, but not flat out. So it was that sort of edge of the line, oh, this could really hurt or it could go well sort of thing every single turn that you got to.
I remember watching those cars at Donington years back. It's same weekend as the Euroboss Formula.
That's right, yeah, I was probably there.
Oh, small world. And I remember many times, and I'm not doing anything to sort of like back my argument up by my driving today, but many times I've watched motorsport and thought, I could do that. Yeah, nothing there I can see that I can't do. I can do. And then those I'll moderate my language in case there's anybody young watching this, but they came out and looked at it and went, Can't do that. Wow, that requires big ghoulies. That looked a hell of a lot of fun, but also deathly frightening, all in one fell swoop. So I think, if I remember correctly, it were Klaus Vart, who's the something to do, is it Koenigsegg or something? And Scott Mansell, no relation to Nigel, that were topping the times out in the Euroboss. And the karts were going like the same speed as a Formula 1 car from 1994. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think the fastest thing that I did was went to Cadwell Park, and we raced the weekend after the British Superbikes, and my qualifying time would have put me 5th in the British Superbikes.
Jesus, that's bonkers. And that's wow, yeah, that's seat your pants, to say the least.
But I mean, other race cars that would be really interesting to see. Some historic stuff. Of course, GT Legends was another thing that I drove a lot on, but I was never involved in it. That was long before I got involved. But it could be really interesting to sort of revisit some of those. You know, with this sort of newfound knowledge on the physics and that sort of thing. It'd be a real challenge, and it'd be a really interesting thing to get involved.
I think basically Sector 3 could print money if they brought a new GT Legends game out. You could quite literally charge what you wanted, and it would sell like hotcakes. A new GT Legends sounds like the most amazing thing in the world.
Well, there you go.
There you go. And I keep telling them that one, so we'll see what happens. Race length 20 minutes. Okay, let's put some fuel in then. 13 should do me, 14 should do me easily. Race time, people.
We're getting a lot of yeses and a lot of yes.
Yes, exactly.
In reference to GT Legends there.
There we go. People who are listening, bully Sector 3 for a new GT Legends. Post yes in the chat now, please. In fact, we'll crowdfund it. Our article coming tomorrow. I almost forgot to race then.
So another little effect from this inertia stuff that's gone on. It just so happens that car-to-car contact is a little bit different how it was before. Seems to mean that one car doesn't go bouncing as far. Basically, the trajectory carries on. It's not so much of an explosion, if that makes sense.
And that's something I think that's been a bit of a criticism in the past, the car-to-car contact. So that'll be interesting to see what difference that's made. Oh God, Alex, I do not like racing people without VR.
Yeah, where are they?
Exactly.
Everyone's a blind spot.
I keep looking, I can't see side to side. Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, the car in front is getting some love. The Hello Kitty car.
Oh, good. So,
of course, we've got quite a lot.
Oh, sorry, carry on.
We've got quite a lot of liveries coming in. I see people are just really carefully watching the background and just trying to figure out which one's which.
Talking about your physics update, has that had any effect on the artificial intelligence?
Well, we've had to redo it. We've had to start again from scratch and teach the AI how to cope with these new cars. So yeah, it's had quite a drastic effect, but they're nicely balanced now. They behave nicely. But again, because that car-to-car contact situation has improved a bit, it means that it's a better situation now.
Yeah. Because I know Sector 3 made quite big strides the way the AI interacts with the player in recent weeks and months. So it'll be interesting to see what difference these new GT3 physics have made to that AI.
Yeah, when I first got involved, and I basically spent my first 2 weeks with Sector 3 just driving and just learning and experimenting and just sort of fiddling before I actually really did anything of substance. But yeah, the AI was definitely something that I thought was really good, and their alertness of how they interact with you, and they will give you space, and they're not likely to punt you off into the first turn, and they're aware of each other, that sort of thing. So the AI is going to be is a little step forwards.
Because it must be incredibly difficult to code human characteristic, realistic AI behaviour in a game. We've had a lot of new releases come out these last year or two that have set to struggle right from the off to get that right, and it's arguable that no one's really got it perfect yet, some better than others, and that must be a difficult thing from a game developer's point of view to get right. And sort of how much resource goes into that, or do you kind of assume that most of the players enjoy the online side of things more?
No, so it is taken very seriously, and it's a lot of time gets spent on it. In fact, I can tell you that in the last week, we had a real big focus on one circuit, and actually went and remodeled a little bit of the pit lane just to help the AI in a really extreme situation. So what we were testing was a really short race with a full up grid of 100 cars.
Nice.
And with a mandatory pit stop. So it meant that all of the cars were going to come in the pit lane at once. We wanted to see what happened and whether it could cope. And we went as far as actually remodelling a little bit of the circuit just to sort of move some tyre barriers just to make it work. So that's how seriously we go. It's not just a case of make the AI fit the track. It was very much a case of, well, what do we actually need to do to make it work? What does it take? So the whole thing's quite dynamic. It's not a case of like a track gets made and then that gets passed on to just gets passed on and just run, and then whatever we do with the AI and the cars do, it's very much something that goes back and forth. And from that actually as well, with the physics, it's quite significant to me, I think, but the actual, when you look at the car in game, the tyre locations are defined by physics and not defined by the model, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
So if the car looks right in the game, it's actually calculating where each corner is by where they actually physically are, if that makes sense. So it's not just a sort of abstract number that's been pulled out. It's the case of everything's actually calculated from the dimensions of the car as it stands in the game.
So obviously if one of those numbers is wrong, or something's not configured correctly, then that'll stand out from the. Sorry, let me stop talking in Beckett's. Back in a minute. Do you know, it makes you. Oh bloody hell! It makes you wonder how Martin Brundle does these Formula 1 car drive things and talks at the same time. But maybe that's why he's paid several million and I'm paid nothing.
There's a very old video somewhere on the internet of some time in the 80s, and the car at Le Mans, and they put a camera in it, and they mic'd up the driver, and he literally did his first stint with the camera in the car talking.
That's quite cool, actually. Yeah, because you see a lot of these sort of old onboard cameras before traditional proper permanent cameras were put, they always seem to be on outlaps or slow laps. They're never on a full push run. So I always think, oh sugar. So I always think it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah. So you can see with this Audi that as much as you have to focus your mind, there are one or two things here that might well have been new if we're in the old Porsche, in the roof still.
Yeah.
So you can just see it's just a bit more pliable and a bit more forgiving.
It's one of these cars where, and I think this is indicative of GT3 regs nowadays, full stop, I don't at any stage, unless I do something ridiculous, feel in danger of spinning. But I need to be concentrated if I want to be clean and fast and get my lines and my points. Whoa. And then the time where you do apply throttle too quickly, like I've just done there, and it makes it a woodcart.
Yep.
It's manageable. It's not doing nothing wild.
That bit of wheel spin still. So it's still got that there. If you're just a bit too keen on the gas, it will just bite.
Yeah.
But again, it's pretty manageable. It's not. I think there was an attribute before that once a car got sideways, would catch it and then it would go the other way.
Yeah, you get a tank slapper too much.
And that's been dialed out. And again, that's another byproduct of these inertias, because inertia basically sort of calms down travel and slows down reaction time a bit.
I do genuinely, and I know I err on the side of optimism a bit too often, I do genuinely think this is a massive, massive improvement. And I thought it was very good to start with. So I think we'll have a lot of people very impressed next week. Did we say next week it's coming out? Next week
that's
or whenever it launches.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of people very pleased with the outcome of this.
Yeah, good. That's what we're hoping. I mean, all directions we've moved it forwards.
Oops, daisy. And that's interesting, and I can't remember if it was like that before, but I broke way too late. And then Mudge came off the brake, went back on it again, just sort of do a bit of cadence braking to stop it, re-grip, brake, re-grip, brake, and that seems more effective than it were previously. It feels like I can do more with the middle pedal, and it'll have more effect on what's happening on car than was once the case in the past. Or is that just me thinking that and it's not true?
No, I think there was definitely an air of, well, people had said that that you couldn't really trail brake very much because it would cause too much of a reaction and the car would be quite easy to spin doing it. So that's calmed down a lot. So that's what you see just there. That there's just a bit more sort of forgiveness going off. But of course, as I said before, the base setups are a little bit understeery, so you can just see every now and then there's just a little bit of a wash out at the front, but that's something that can be pretty easily dialed out.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, just to stress again, I'm using absolutely basic setup. I just took a little teeny bit of fuel out for my quali run and race. So you can make a car really dance to any tune you want with the appropriate setup on it. So that's just one of those things. But they are nice. It is a user-friendly or rookie-friendly base setting that we've got going on here.
And with the settings on the workshop side of things, we've still got the same options open. So our gear ratios are all fixed. That is how GT3 works. So some people might think the gear ratios are maybe a little bit strange for one circuit, but the reason being is that the manufacturer has to homologate the gear ratios for what they think might be the most extreme scenario. Yeah. They might have to homologate a gear ratio that would be long enough to run at Bathurst, but then when they go to Macau, they might only just touch sixth going out on the main straight. That's just simply the way it is. But all of these engines have got loads and loads of torque anyway, so it's not really sort of a major problem. But as I said, because of the way that we've gone about it and the information that we've got coming in, these gear ratios are literally the homologated gear ratios.
And all that exciting talk of gear ratios has resulted in a little bit of a spin. He does that to me, gear ratio talk.
I guess you're going.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Grinds my gears. Never mind. On the topic of setup options and various different things, tyre pressures are something that we are still not seeing in the title, I believe. Is that Is there a physics reason for that? Is that going to have a major impact on what you do to insert tyre pressures?
So, if we had tyre pressures as an option, which we could well do, and I don't know, we might end up reducing them. Basically, what we've got at the moment is the tyre pressure are optimal all the time. And that's it. So if you were to lower or higher the tyre pressures from what they are in all the cars now, it'd be a worse situation. You'd have less grip. The way that it's been done, because the option for the tyre pressures isn't there, the tyre pressures are optimal all the time.
I just made the mistake of intending to go to the race monitor to watch the other cars, and there isn't one. Didn't think about that. Never mind. We'll look at car setups. So what was...
Yeah, let's have a look at the car setup.
Yeah. So what we were saying about tyre pressures, is that something that maybe would be looked to be brought into the same?
Yeah, well, it's not something that we've actually really discussed yet, but it is a possibility. The option is there. We can do it. So if we go, and you can see that if you just look at the car setup screen at the moment, you can see that all the dampers are all set to 9 clicks. That just means that they're on the middle setting because they've all got 18. Well, they've not all got 18 actually. A lot of them have got 18 clicks. That's simply the way that it is. Yeah, so you can go either way with it, basically.
Yeah. And from your point of view, is there any sort of like standard advice and basic tips that you could give to people that are maybe not so confident in setting a car up, that sort of help bring what the standard offering is a little bit more racy? Or what would you do if you wanted a little bit more turning understeer or a little bit of a lighter, looser back end? Just a few sort of like basic pointers for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how long have we got? But yeah, so what this car's naturally a little bit understeery. So first thing that people do, and I think this is the first mistake that people do, is they go wing, take the wing off.
Yeah.
Now that might change the balance of the car, but it also takes the downforce off the car. So you're changing the balance but in the wrong way, because you're going to actually really make the car slower because you've got rid of overall downforce. I mean, in certain situations on a high-speed track, it might be the right thing to do. But if you were racing on a really tight circuit and you wanted it to be more pointy at the front end, you wouldn't take the wing off because you want the downforce. So what you do is you look at the chassis setup. So anti-roll bars are, really quite important and quite up there. It really depends on which point of the corner that you're looking at that you wanted to change the setup. If we wanted more turn in, then we're trail braking. You can almost think of that as like a setup tweak, because you're managing the weight transfer of the car. So you've got to make sure that you're trail braking, get the weight to sit forwards. To get it to sit forwards more, we'd soften off the bump damping. And maybe even stiffen the rebound a little bit, so when the weight's sat forward on the car, it stays there. We can also soften off the front springs. Camber is something that by itself is not really something that you'd say, oh, if we take the camber off, it will do this. It's very much kind of like finding a sweet spot. So you'd maybe go up a click, down a click, or 2 or 3 until you kind of find something that works because it's making the tyre work. Ride height, again, I said before that you might want to make the weight sit forwards. So if you lowered the front ride height, the centre of gravity sits further forwards. So that's one thing that you'd do. You've also got your differential preload. Now that took me some figuring out to actually work out what that does, but now I've got it. That is how much of a wheel speed difference that the tyres are asking for before they're allowed to have it. Does that make any sense?
The words that you speak make perfect sense. The context in which you place them is in a foreign language to me.
Okay, so if we have preload that's at the maximum, it might mean that we have to go around a really tight turn before we have any wheel speed difference. But if we have it at the minimum, then you might be able to have a wheel speed difference in a very sweeping turn. Until that point, you've got a solid axle. So these cars with a limited slip diff are basically like a go-kart on the back up to a point. They have a solid rear axle until whatever your preload setting is achieved.
So there you have it, people.
I'll leave it to some of those guys to write that down and think about it.
See the vacant expression that I've got here going. Okay, yeah.
Traction control's an interesting one as well, because you can use that very much as a balance tweak. You know, how much you're leaning on the traction control can actually really change the balance of the car.
And I think that's something that's underappreciated. I think a lot of people say, no, traction control, get rid of it, I don't want any artificial support. And actually, certain degrees of traction control, as you say, can very much change what the car's capable of doing without sort of taking away the whole throttle control requirement that you would sort of like associate with it. The more traction control you have, the less that you've got to manage the throttle. And I find that small amounts of traction control is to kick in at key points. It can be quite an important tool, quite a useful tweak you can make to a car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find that maybe just another 1 or 2% just sort of helps to keep that back in line, and it might be a little bit loose coming out of one turn, say a slow turn, but really perfectly balanced around all the fast. Yeah. So you don't want to make any chassis changes. You might just up the traction control a little bit just to help you out of those slow turns. And it's worth mentioning as well that, of course, all these GT3 cars do run traction control, and they do all run ABS in the real world. That is how they are. Yeah. It goes a little bit further with we've not got any, but when they go to GTE cars, some of those can actually run stability control. So, you know, don't think of a traction control as a weakness. It's a tool. It's something there definitely to use.
Excellent. Well, Alex, thank you very much for the time you've taken to sit with us today for a good couple of hours or so. I can say from my experience, these cars feel fantastic. When I drove the old GT3 cars on the new physics, as you mentioned earlier, they're brand new cars basically. They might look like things you've driven before, but they've got no relevance to what you've done previously. Absolutely beautiful, and yes, we'll be getting the update next week. I'm correct in saying, Alex, that the update, the physics changes will address all the cars regardless of if you buy the new content or not.
Yeah, all of the GT3 cars are being updated, so yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. We've been live for a while and I really need toilet. So, yeah, really appreciate it. And let's do this again soon with something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Superb. The first of many. You heard it here first. Superb. Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.
Cheers. Take care. Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And see you next time.